What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today's video, we are back with another Detroit Lions draft video, and today we are diving into the undrafted free agent signings. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to our video. Glad you guys are here, and yes, we're back with another Detroit Lions draft video, but today we're changing it up a little bit, and we're diving into the undrafted free agent signings that have been reported for the Detroit Lions to this point. Now, these names come from an unofficial list, so just keep that in mind if things change. Maybe we get a different designation a little bit later. And of course, there could always be players added to this list until the Lions roster fills out and you can't add any more players. So just keep those things in mind, that there will be updates and changes to this. Last season, we did like a 2-episode video of this where we broke it into 2, and we just kind of did a nice little rundown of the undrafted free agent signings the Lions had made to that point in time. And I don't know if anything actually changed beyond that, but if it did, we probably just did something separately, and that's kind of what this is going to be. Now, I'm aiming for this to be one video, so I'm going to have to go kind of quickly through each player because there's a good amount of players to dive into. However, I was hoping to make this one video. Now, with that being said, this is not a full deep dive breakdown on each of these players individually. In fact, my opinions could absolutely change when we start to do these players individually. When I do a full video just for one guy, opinions that I say today could absolutely change once I get a bigger sample size of the player. However, today, what I wanted to do was just do a quick little rundown of what I know about the players so far, from the little that I have watched on each of these players. Some a little bit more than others. Actually, 2 of these guys I had watched before the undrafted free agent signings came out, just getting prepared for the NFL draft. So 2 of them, already my notes were just made on the players, so I'm just going to go through those. Again, my opinions can change, but I'm also going to keep this thing short and sweet, and this does not include the rookie minicamp tryout invites, okay? These are undrafted free agent signings that have been reported so far for the Lions. And really, there's no specific order to this whatsoever because my notes are kind of all over the place, so we're just going to jump around. So, getting this thing started, we're going to start at the receiver position with the receiver that goes by the name of Isaiah Williams from Illinois, listing it at just over 5'2", 5'2", 182. Now, we're going to start with Isaiah Williams because this is the one that immediately when I saw the name, I was like, oh, I know who this guy is. And the reason I knew who this guy was because he's one of the players that I had broke down before the draft started. But specifically, I really liked Isaiah Williams. I can remember sitting there on day 3 when we were live streaming and bringing up Isaiah Williams multiple times from Illinois. Now, he went undrafted, of course. But, for example, a guy like Anthony Gold out of Oregon State, I had this player ranked above him. Not really many other players that got drafted, but just to kind of put it into perspective. Plus, I knew him from somewhere, and I found the clip. So I'm going to play the clip from Bleacher Report. I went through my sleepers that the Lions should draft. That was the prompt that we had. And I don't know, there's probably like 6, maybe 7 players on there. And one of those players, one of the 2 receivers that I listed was Isaiah Williams. So while we didn't draft him, we did sign him. And reportedly, he is also going to get a $240K guaranteed. Some UDFAs get that, some don't. So with that being said, let's run the clip. A little bit different in this sense. He didn't test out incredibly well. You see the numbers there, 4.63 40, 30.5 inch vertical, which is really good. 3 cone is really good. The 40 time, I mean, is not big time. But when you watch him, the play speed feels a lot better than that. You know, he led the Big Ten in yards after catch, 10th in FBS this past season. And when I watch him, I'm like, yo, this guy, these are the players. This is the type of player who's known as, he's one, right? Number 1. This is the type of player where you're watching for something else and you're like, who is that dude? That was him at the Shrine Bowl. I was watching for a lot of other guys, and he's the guy that continues to pop up. I'm team captain. You see that aspect. You know, the Lions love those kind of things. And I do think one part of the Pascal thing was that it was unique that he was a 3-time first time. But I do think that this is a player where the route running upside is really good. Like, this guy could separate on all 3 levels. He's also one of those players that specifically on level 1, his ability to run complex route. You're talking about whip routes. You're talking about double breaks, create separation, the change of speed. There is some savviness in the head movement, though I don't think the polish is consistently there. He actually has a lot of similar measurables to St. Brown outside of the fact that he's a little bit shorter. Now, I think he carries route strength, which is one of the big positives because while he's not built to play as a wide receiver, he does have route strength and he competes like crazy. I also hate that he only has 3 contested catches and that it wasn't consistent. You see some of the hands pop up there in terms of he just doesn't have large hands at the catch point. But I like the way that he competes. I feel like he can open up so much within his route tree. Scale of like 2 different types of receivers. So that's why I thought it was great to kind of put him next to each other. You got one guy who's very crafty, a lot of savvy. I think he's actually pretty polished in the way that he separates. There's just a lot of limitations, right? So, you know, the Tom Kennedy comp. And then there's the flip side where I'm like, yo, Isaiah Williams, even though he's a little bit on the shorter side, I'm like, there's a lot here. He could also be a very valuable punt returner, especially now with special teams and where that's going, though we don't need a punt returner. But then there's the aspect of like there needs to be more polish. And I think that's what he's lacking in comparison to,
clearly a guy like St. Brown.
Technically speaking, there was a lot of things that I liked about his hands, whether that was quickly flipping his hands. You saw late hands that were on display. He also had adequate length. Some of these smaller receivers, they just don't have much of a catch radius at all. I didn't think that was a massive issue with this player, though his contested catch rate being only at 21.4% isn't great. He absolutely will compete in those positions, but he does have small hands, and I think that could be on display at times. What I did like is his separation upside rather than necessarily all of his route running. I thought he brought some route savvy to the table. I can remember one example where he put his hand up in the air to try to get the cornerback to make him think like, oh, he wants the football. This guy thinks he's open. And he just did that to completely sell a route break that he ultimately set up. So there was some savvy as a route runner, but route running in general I didn't think was necessarily his strong suit. Prove how he sits down in his zone positioning. Also, at times I wanted to see him press half turn a little bit more, but he does compete. And I thought his ability to get separation back to his skill set was a little bit on the higher side, where that was excellent sync. You would see it on level and routes. 4 forced missed tackles, statistically speaking. Again, not necessarily great in contest situations, but I love the battle that this player brought to the table. And I think the upside in terms of separation is there. So Isaiah Williams, definitely a guy that I was really excited to see the name of, because I thought he was draftable, to be honest with you. I didn't think he was as clean as some of these other, smaller receivers, but I thought the dynamic athleticism and the fight within his game, seemingly like, hey, I'm always open. I want the football. Throw me the football. You got that vibe when watching Isaiah Williams, and I absolutely love that. And I think you need that kind of nature to potentially make a roster spot as an undrafted free agent. So that's Isaiah Williams. All right, next player we're going to move on to, jump around a little bit. We're going to go to Steele Chambers, the linebacker out of Ohio State. This is the other guy that I had watched before the draft, so I knew about Steele Chambers, just listing in at basically 6'1.5", 226, a little bit on the smaller side. He's actually a former running back that's transitioned to the linebacker position, and my overall note for this player was that he was an instinctual player. All right, that's what stands out when you watch him, his ability to navigate trash, his ability to press, run gaps, fill his lane, and then be able to work off of that and just get a sense of where the running backs are going to be. You got a really instinctual feel in his ability to navigate inside the box. Now, with that, I also thought he threw some shed ability as well. He's a little bit shorter in terms of arm length, just 30.5 inches there, and he also could get a lot stronger because when offensive linemen get clean contact on him, he gets washed out of the play. He also has some coverage upside as well. I don't think he's going to be an elite coverage piece necessarily, especially in man coverage. I think the further downfield, it looks like it gets a little bit less sticky, it gets a little bit more clunky when you're asking him to kind of be reactive and stick in somebody's hip, but he showed that he was capable in working with running backs out of the backfield and doing kind of more of the simplistic coverage assignments, specifically in man coverage. Now, zone coverage, I thought there was some good here. Closing on routes in zone coverage, finding route stems, working through combinations. I think the big thing here is that he can get a little bit short-sighted and kind of lose the entire picture that's happening, but there was some coverage ability within his game. To me, I just thought this was a very smart player within the box that had an ability to navigate and read a run scheme, get on top of it, but also play with patience, keep his shoulders square to the line of scrimmage, quickly scrape, and then he showed ability to shed, whether that was, again, not bad hand usage, getting in the chest, staying square to the line of scrimmage, but then also even showing some of the quickness and agility to quickly kind of shed or just be slippery within the box, even though you didn't see that all the time. So for me, this was a guy that I thought was just very instinctual from when I had watched him, quick scraping laterally. Now, he's not the fast player. His straight line speed, range, and sideline to sideline is okay. It's adequate, but it didn't seem to be great to me necessarily. And I also don't know how much lean he brought behind the line of scrimmage to open up a ton of pass rush potential here. But overall, this is a very solid linebacker for Ohio State that, you'd have times where you lose some gap or integrity with him, maybe just trying to kind of feel the running back a little bit too much and he'd get pulled out late on the play. But the flip side is that he constantly kind of feels like he's near the football, and he actually racks up a lot of tackles throughout a game, and you usually like where he ends up towards the end of the play. So for me, Steele Chambers, he's a guy that I liked. A little bit surprised, actually, that he went undrafted, but I guess I can kind of get it a little bit in a sense because you want that playmaking there from that position. Definitely a player I'm excited to dive into more of, though, because those are just kind of my early notes on the player. Continuing on, let's now move on to UCLA because we have an offensive lineman, and that's Duke Clemens out of UCLA, who reportedly is getting $60K guaranteed by the Detroit Lions. Now, we have a couple of offensive linemen to dive into. They're all actually listed as centers. They all played centers from the games that I had watched, and this does make sense. I mean, the Lions went out when they added Manu, who I think really could play the guard position. I understand he's 6'8", 350, but I thought when we went through the clips on Bleacher Report the day after the draft, and I was watching this player went through a couple of games, and just the movement skills, the short area quickness within his game, the recovery, the control, and also the pad level to create leverage, I thought, man, this guy could absolutely play guard. And then when I watched a guy like Christian, I'm like, man, this guy feels like he could also play center, but we know that he's a guard from Boston College that's played a ton of starts there. So it does make sense that the Lions would bring in a ton of different potential centers in for workouts, not to say they'll all play center, but it does because they didn't necessarily address that straight on, and Michael Neese being your backup center, maybe you're looking for some real competition for that, so that does make sense. He also tested in pretty well as well, 29-inch vertical, 7.663 cone. He ran the 5.11.40 and 26 bench press reps. What stood out to me here more than anything was more of the anchor within his game. That was probably the most consistent thing that I saw when watching Duke Clemens. Rather than necessarily the play strength, I thought there was some inconsistencies there. I just love the firm technique that he played with in terms of his ability to create a really early anchor on the play. Leveraged into his entry points in pass protection, gets under pads pretty naturally in pass protection as well. He's also had a nice little first step, which was pretty accurate in pass pro to kind of set himself up, but he's very quick to set into his anchor, which is key from center, but is also kind of key from guard as well. We talk about resetting into an anchor. That's where I thought there showed to be a little bit more issues, kind of resetting the hand usage, resyncing himself down so he could create a little bit throughout the play if it's not there initially. That could be a little bit more of an issue. Some good here. Specifically, you saw it in a lot of the zone scheme that they utilized, working from block to block, whether that was, A gap to A gap or working from A gap into the second level. First step for me, it wasn't necessarily great as a zone blocker. There was definitely occasions where you see guys split gaps on him, and I think that's something that could absolutely pop up against a heavy one-tech team in the NFL. You also could have a little bit late reactiveness, and you'd see it on slant rushers or defenders that would kind of just slant through to opposite gaps, just a little bit late there to kind of react in some of those spots. And his lateral agility and space didn't blow me away necessarily either, and that can kind of pop up specifically when you're working to the second level. But he had sustainability, and this is a key factor, of course, whether that's through pad level, that's created foot drive, adequate drive through linebackers, and also, again, entry angles. And you would specifically see it on some wide zone spots, working on nose tackles, being able to knock nose tackles out of the play. The other knock that I had really was for control for me. This was an area that I actually had my lowest early grade for the player, looking for connection. He could be a little bit slippery. It feels like getting that initial connection on defensive linemen. Struggle a little bit squeezing off in pass protection and squeezing off assignments. Things can get a little bit unnatural there. But the big positive is that there is patience within his game when you see him passing off stunts and working through those. Intelligence where you just saw pre-snap awareness, so he could be a little bit slower dealing with stunts. For me, Duke Clemens was a guy that the anchor stood out immediately. That was real consistency there, and it feels like that's one of those things that you could probably build on with the player. Continuing on now, let's move to the edge rusher position, and I do apologize if I'm saying any of these names incorrectly as usual, because I'm pretty sure that I am. Isaac Ukwu? I don't think I'm saying that right. Isaac Ukwu from Ole Miss, the edge rusher, transfer from James Madison. Now, I know his teammate really well, Cedric Johnson, because we did a full video on Cedric Johnson, but this was a player that honestly gave me a little more flash than I expected. I didn't know what to expect here, and the games that I had went through were with Ole Miss specifically. I mean, Tulane, I was like, this guy looks really good in that game. This is a guy, statistically speaking, 3.5 sacks this past year with 4.5 tackles for loss. Played a lot in a stand-up role, listing at a 6'2.5", 260. Also reportedly getting a $35K guaranteed here by the Lions. Good arm length at 33 inches, which definitely can work from the edge rusher position. 4.88 40, 36-inch vertical with also 29 bench press reps and a 7.35 3-cone drill. So I would say the testing numbers are definitely fine there. Now, when you talk about first step explosion, I thought this was a little bit below average, though he could carry some good depth, and he was adequate in terms of his reactive quickness just to the snap in general. As a pass rusher, again, I thought this was a little bit below average here for me. Like the footwork and the way that he could tie it with his hand usage, which I had as, closer to an average grade from the early games that I went through. The sidestep counters, you would see it inside. The club rip ability, you'd see it with his footwork that could tie together pretty well, and he had some success kind of getting into the chest of offensive linemen. Speed to power seemed to kind of be his calling card in terms of how he liked to rush as a pass rusher, and he also had an ability to kind of set up a long arm move, which I also liked as well. Not always consistently there, but he had that within his game, and he does have some of the length to do it. Issues though, agility, you see it on kind of stunt work. You also had issues of suddenness at the top of his pass rush, and even decisiveness in some of his inside counters. He stood out to me was being a plus player in run support, specifically in terms of his play strength. Now, the take-on technique consistently probably could be improved, but he does square himself to set an edge. He has controlled footwork. He plays with disciplined vision, though he can lack leverage at times when he's dealing with pullers. That was the area where I thought there was a real positive and a plus. Now, closing burst, probably not where you're exactly going to want it to consistently rack up sacks, and I think you can maybe see that a little bit by the numbers there, but he also has a lot of experience dropping into coverage and having to be fluid in coverage. He does play with real vision in those spots. And I would also give him positive marks in some of the slither that he plays with just as a pass rusher in general, but then also you can see some of that lean at the top of the rush to flatten the arc. Plus, he has a little bit of a lean to create top of rush flat, and so you talk about the long arm moves, the ability to win the high side of an offensive tackle. Feels like there's going to be some ability there, but tight hips is probably the big concern there within the flexibility especially for me. But overall, this was a player that honestly surprised me a lot because I was watching Cedric Johnson. I never even noticed this guy, but I'm like, I don't know how I didn't notice him because he has some real flash plays in here. Continuing on, let's move over to the other edge rusher out of William and Mary, and this is Nate Lynn, listing in at similarly sized, 6'2.5", 253, I guess a little bit on the lighter side here. The big takeaway that I had with this player is that he's not particularly strong. When you tie that with the fact that he only has 31-inch arms, it's a little bit underwhelming, and it would make sense why the player would go undrafted. However, he does have some real craftiness as a pass rusher, and honestly, you're going to find a lot more wins within this guy's game than you would maybe expect. Tested in with 20 bench press reps, 30.5-inch vertical, 7.43 3-cone drill, and a 4.8 40. When I had went through the player, I actually had some real positive grades with this player. I thought he had a plus first step that was covering ground, explosiveness out of a three-point stance, but also kind of the quickness into getting into backside pursuit to contain. Now, getting ground laterally, that could be a little bit of an issue, especially when you talk about being on the front side, being able to mirror in those positions. As a pass rusher, I also thought that he was a plus in this spot. So I guess a little bit of a flip side of the last guy, which honestly, like I said, these opinions could change when I get to watch more. Maybe I'm like, what was I talking about? It's the other way around. But right now, I actually liked him a little bit more as a pass rusher than I did the last edge rusher that we just talked about. Speed to power transition could be a little bit underwhelming, but he did show a way to win in a variety of ways. He had a nice little spin move, which created a little bit of bend as well within his game. I thought he did a nice job with angles to kind of create half-man opportunities. Real craftiness as a pass rusher. Now, the knocks here for me was kind of the stop and start twitch, some of the shake through the top of the rush, and even some of the countered footwork, which will probably be improved a little bit to just help add more consistency. As a run defender, I was a little bit lower on it here, a little bit, more below average in this category. Even though he's a little bit thicker in the lower body and he's a little bit closer to the ground, you'll kind of see some of that contact balance show up in pursuit, which I do like. I do think that setting the edge, you see that he doesn't constantly kind of play behind the line of scrimmage. He does drop his pad level, which is a positive, but even against tight ends one-on-one, like he wasn't dominating that matchup. If anything, you saw him kind of get moved off his spot more often than not. That's not great, and some of that lower body power I think could show up, especially as a pass rusher as well. But maybe one of my biggest positive was where the hand usage was at, and this was mainly from the long arm swipe that he create, using both hands in unison to create, opportunities to win as a pass rusher, quickly getting ready his hands. So second effort hand usage where you can open up some late wins. He doesn't carry a lot of knockback in his punches, but you did see some craftiness within his hand usage, the suddenness that you'd see with. Plus, on top of that, probably the reason I had a little bit of a higher pass rushing spot is because I also thought he carried some flexion within his game as well. There was loose hips at the top of his rush. You'd see the ability to turn the corner. He was a little bit loose in the upper body, so you'd see some dip. With that, though, the ankle flexion would probably be the biggest knock here overall out of anything. And he also played with some discipline on the backside, even though he was hit and miss with kind of reading the offensive line movement. But definitely a guy that surprised me, man. He could flash. He could go on some really nice run there. So Nate Lynn out of William Mary, definitely someone I'm keeping my eye on. Maybe they can get him a little bit stronger and some things can come together there. I'm going to move on to a linebacker, I guess slash safety here. From what I watched, he played off-ball linebacker. And this is Deron Gilbert out of Northern Illinois. Again, hopefully I'm saying the name right. We're from Lafayette, just over 6'1", 214. The testing was really good, specifically the fact that he had 34-inch arms, which I love. For a guy that's not on the taller side there, especially playing within the box, it can actually add some upside, especially if the Lions want to just try to put weight on him. 34-inch arms is going to work. 14 bench press reps, 4.72 40, which isn't fantastic, so it makes you consider a little bit like, okay, how much flexibility is there here to make him more of a defensive back? Definitely can understand a special teams aspect, no question about that, but beyond doing that specifically, and what I watched, he was playing the off-ball backer position. One thing that was a real common theme with a lot of players, whether that was through the Lions' actual draft or just going through these UDFAs, football intelligence, instincts, they were just something that you constantly felt when you were watching, especially the defensive players when he got to the second and third levels, and that's what I noticed here with him. Fast communicator, he also takes communication really well, so if the linebacker tells a slide, he's going to slide. He's really quick to kind of play off of the communication that he's going to get from teammates around him. Also, is very quick in man coverage responsibilities, kind of switching off assignments, like, okay, I got the back, or no, you have the back now, let me go get the quarterback. Now, when you talk about play speed, it was the twitchy transitions in the lower body, and it was the tight angles to the ball that I did like in pursuit. Also, some real quickness when he came to opening his hips, and he works to avoid getting washed out. For a guy that was undersized, he kind of worked to avoid that a little bit. He had footwork to gain depth in zone coverage. As a tackler, he carried a lot of range within his game. The issue is between the box to shed, he had a very thin build. I don't think he felt the arm length as much necessarily. He has some quickness opening his hips, but I wonder how much flexion is actually there. So this is a player that in high school played linebacker, safety, and receiver, and in the last 2 seasons, he was listed as a safety. So I guess maybe you'd have to pull it back a little bit to see him play more of that role. Definitely going to be curious to see what this looks like.
The movement skills look like a guy that could play as a defensive back, but I'd probably have to go back to his safety film to get a better sense of whether or not he could actually stick there.
Move over to the other receiver that we have, just Jaylen Calhoun out of Duke. He's at 5'9", 7, so basically 5'9", 49 slightly and a half, a little bit more over a half. 186. He posted a 4.65 40 time, 11 bench press reps, 7.44 3-cone, and a 34-inch vertical. When it came to being able to create separation, the big knock I had here was maybe just some of the flexibility in his hips, but he did show strides out of his cut, and he was able to plant on the brakes as a route runner, which helped as well. For me, I actually liked his route running, though, the most here, maybe more than even just the separation upside, because to me, it's the footwork that he would utilize into the top of the routes. He opened up a lot of speed route wins, whether that was slants, outs, explosiveness, and burstiness when it came to out of breaks, and that's really important, I think, specifically when you're talking about separating level 1. Had some savviness to kind of create, okay, cornerback's going to sink if I press him this way, working in off coverage. I like how working against off coverage corners could kind of squeeze on his routes. He would kind of let that happen, like creating fade routes or whatever that was from the slot position. And when you talk about some of the savvy, I thought there was some of that there, stepping down in front of linebackers, kind of having a sense of what's going on around him, but then also doing a nice job of creating pick plays, working for teammates. That's also another thing that I noticed about some of these receivers, man. They're really good in those spots, working alongside of others. And probably one of the bigger strengths is that he was very fast into his transition. The catch to tuck transition was very quick. It also helped him kind of avoid contested situations as well. I don't think his acceleration was necessarily great from those spots, but the transition ability was really there, and I think that helped him contest situations, but it also helped open up run after catch opportunity as well. Now, crosser speed, again, straight line speed to separate, probably a little bit limited. Also, the vertical push is kind of missing a little bit, just some of the speed there, but overall, there was some football intelligence within his routes, and he was also an active blocker to that as well.
But the overall impression I had is this is a guy that's going to make himself a good target for a quarterback, usually finding space, separating from linebackers underneath, and also having that ability to quickly transition to pull the ball out of traffic.
The big thing is going to be keeping focus within his hands, how fast he likes to transition, being able to stay focused in contested situations. Continuing on, let's flip over to a guy that, man, I really liked. I mean, this was one of my favorite players to watch from this UDFA class. This guy flashed quickly, and this is going to be Maurice. Is it Morris? It might be Morris. Maurice, Morris, Maurice, Morice? I don't think it's Morice. Norris, out of Fresno State, listed at 5'10", just over 5'10", 181. That kind of played that slot cornerback role with Fresno State. And you look at the testing scores, 4.56 40, 38-inch vertical, 10 bench press reps, a sub 7-second 3-cone drill, which will work. What I liked is that the guy ultimately played with an edge. I think he looks like a big nickel / potential safety. I don't think as a wide corner, which he also mixed in as well, depending on personnel sets, is maybe going to be the long-term fit here for the Lions, especially asking him to live in man coverage. Feels like that could be an issue. Even in slot coverage, you would felt like guys could get a little bit vertical on him, and he felt like, okay, against certain competition, this could be a problem. He could get stacked a little bit too often here. However, he actually handled his business from the games that I watched pretty well, but I just like the edge that he plays. This feels like more of a safety / kind of a big nickel, depending on what you're asking of him. What stood out to me, though, is I actually thought he played with plus play speed. Like, I didn't feel the play speed as much as an issue as it is just looking at that 40 time, and, you know, we can kind of say the same thing with our outside cornerbacks right now, and Terrion, and guys will bring up his 40 speed. It's like, dude, watch him play. The guy can really run. And I kind of got the sense from this guy as well, whether that was kind of the lean when he was in trail positions to kind of stick in guys' hips, but then also the recovery speed looked way better than that 40 time would represent. He showed ball skills, and that came through really the physicality that he plays with as a press corner, specifically real competitiveness at the top of the route. Also a sense for route development. Where I liked him most was really the press situations that he was put in. Fast stabs at the line of scrimmage with not bad arm length, just under 32 inches, which really can work from a cornerback position. You felt the length there. Also, he plays with good vision through contact in man coverage, so once he gains control, he can read the quarterback through man coverage, which is huge, and that opens up a lot of the ball skills there. He's strong at the point of attack, and he does a nice job of having the awareness to kind of let go if he feels like he's getting a little bit handsy to try to avoid some of those spots. He may rely on that too much. I'll have to watch more, but overall, I got a sense of that. He is very physical. I think he could be a little bit high into his pads looking for that contact, necessarily sinking down as much as you would like him to, but his feet did move through contact well. And then through off-man coverage, you saw anticipation, his ability to cut off stems consistently, like kind of just get a sense of like, it's leaning this way, let me just step right in front of that and take that route away. That's why it gave me the sense of like, okay, this guy could maybe work from the nickel, maybe a little bit off-man at the outside corner position, but specifically safety. When you have that anticipation, especially against guys, if you're matching up against tight ends that maybe don't have the same kind of movement skills, you felt that anticipation, the ability to kind of just step over routes. Again, being even a little little bit undersized there. And then again in zone coverage, awareness on the move, some blitz success here as well. He had some smooth side steps that he would utilize. He lacked some nimbleness as a pass rusher. He used his hand wells to shed. He had a nice take on technique, and you would see that against screens, and he would ultimately battle when he was in the box. Against the run, he sticks his nose in, which is usually the case with every defensive back that the Lions tend to add, and then he also allows for edge set recovery. He has a sense of like, okay, I'm getting too tight inside. Let me allow myself to get back out to the edge here, and when he strikes low. Overall, this is a player that I would absolutely keep an eye on, like it just in an early process. Again, we'll probably do deeper breakdowns later on, but for now, keep an eye on my man Norris out of Fresno State. Let's move back to the offensive side of the ball to a tight end, and this is Isaac Rex out of BYU, listing it at just over 6'5", 247. The biggest thing that stood out to me earlier with this player was pass protection. That's where I was like, hey, I really like what he does in pass pro. The testing numbers are not going to blow you away in any sense. 4.98 40-yard time, 24 bench press reps, 27-inch vertical. Not going to be very exciting, 32-inch arms. But the pass protection is what stood out to me there, because technically, like, you have to be pretty sound to have success from a tight end there. And you saw the hips, you saw the strength within that lower body to kind of maintain and sustain dealing with pass rushers. The way that he would square up well, and then also active feet through contact that would continue to run in pass protection. You saw good lateral footwork, punch time, and grip strength from pass protection. Now, as a run blocker, while I think he could get a little bit tall when he was working upfield to kind of change directions, what I did like is that he had tight entry angles in line, and he would widen his frame. I liked a lot of things about his game as a blocker overall. Smart positioning on screens, move block positioning. You felt there was core strength and strength in the hip specifically. Also, even though maybe some of the agility is not necessarily there at the second level, you did feel like there was control into those blocks, and he could create bend to try to create some leverage. Now, as a receiving option, there was things I liked here. He didn't feel like he was a guy that necessarily going to be dynamic at separating from man coverage. I'll have to watch more for that, but I didn't get that sense early on necessarily, and rolling into cuts could be a little bit of an issue. But overall, he showed some eye discipline, and that was nice. You saw eye discipline, saw awareness, like where linebackers were in zone coverage, when to flip his eyes back to the ball. Again, top of the route footwork could be a little bit slower, creating separation there. That's probably going to be a little bit more of an issue for his game. And then play speed, again, it wasn't necessarily bad here. It's maybe just average at best. Still have to watch more, but crosser speed was adequate. Didn't give you much of a vertical push, but the biggest positive was how quickly he got to his stride. So early in the route, he could kind of stride himself out and create distance 5 to 10 yards pretty quickly, and that feels like an area where he's going to give himself a lot of success, especially when you talk about attacking seams or racing into the flat, things like that. It's a nice little nuance that he has to his game, which could help him separate specifically depending on what you're asking him. And that can also open up crosser speed as well. And then he showed good hands, and that really came back to focus in traffic, but also soft and reactive hands. You just wonder about some of the strength within contested situations. So Isaac Rex, like the blocking, want to see more out of BYU. Back to the offensive line, we have a guy that got some real guaranteed money here, man. We're talking about $245K, and this is going to Kingsley Egukan, the center out of Florida, listed at 6'3.5", 304, tested in pretty well, 32-inch vertical, 26 bench press reps, also 32.5-inch arm. Energy check player that would absolutely battle through a pass protection rep, so that's immediately would stand out, just kind of the effort that he would ultimately end up playing with. The measurables were good as well, and there was some solid reactive quickness when you watched his game, and that was quickness off the line, quickness into pass sets. It was agility out in space, which you did see. It was also some of the flexion. I think he was able to create the second level a little bit as well, some of the bend, the inside zone control as a run blocker, and then also some of the quickness into jump sets from that center position, wanting to get on guys quickly, while also some of the wide zone, being able to turn and run at an average pace, which it felt like. Now, the anchor could be a little bit inconsistent here for me, kind of the initial anchor base that he would create. I did think that he showed the flexibility to be able to reset his anchor and be able to kind of sit himself down throughout the rep, and he showed some core strength as well within his game. Though, didn't feel that he was much of a people mover consistently, and that was when he would lean a little bit more than necessarily creating great leverage into contact. Control could become a little bit of an issue as well when that's getting too tall laterally, kind of reset in front of reach blocks, right? Peel over and position himself, oversetting a pass pro, which would ultimately leave open creases for the pass rushers to get through, and also getting a little bit skinny and upright through his sustain, and then unclean shots, which would limit his movement a little bit. But he's physical, he'd run downhill, and he would absolutely battle. And then the hand use, he had an explosive punch at the point of attack. I did feel like that overall you need to speed up that his hand usage, nose tackle specifically, guys that would play right on top of him, and also his timing within his punch could be a little bit inconsistent as well. But he had sudden hands in pass protection, he improved some of that usage there in terms of two-handed punches, things like that. And then also he showed pretty fast eyes when you talk about pass pro, pretty clear vision. So overall, you talk about like solid reactive athleticism. I thought the flexibility was there to create a reset, and maybe if you can clean up of some things anchor-wise. You could probably improve his strength a little bit as well, but there was a real battle within this guy's game, and he was a 3-year starter at center. So Kingsley, for me, overall, got some guaranteed money here. Definitely a guy that I need to watch a lot more of, but early signs, there was some impressive stuff to watch there. I don't know that he was my favorite center necessarily, but you definitely could, like, he felt different than the other two centers that I had watched. He gave you a different vibe with just the way that he played the game, just the energy that he played with. So I can understand that. And then again, his measurables, some athleticism, I can understand why there'd be interest here from the Lions. Speaking of offensive linemen, though, how about we go to Louisville? And that is Brian Hudson out of Louisville, listed at 6'4.5", 300 pounds. That definitely did a lot of zone blocking usage. Good arm length here, almost 33-inch arms, 29-inch vertical, 5'3", 40, which isn't necessarily great in a 7.46 3-cone drill. But this was a guy that I definitely liked, and it really stemmed back from this. It stemmed back from the reactive athleticism, which was the quick lateral step off the line of scrimmage, the quickness into position in pass protection, the quickness that he had laterally. He was smooth versus nose tackles in pass protection situations. Now, he did have a little bit of a struggle to reset his anchor. I thought he lacked a little bit of play strength here, whether that was, kind of creating leg drive or, pushing off defenders, kind of putting them out of their spot and then working up to the second level. I did like that he played with a wide base, and that could maintain even when guys were trying to create kind of walk back, maybe a little bit less bend within his anchor. And then he also had, I thought, some really nice control within his game as well. Probably my highest grade that I had early from watching the player. Recovery, footwork in traffic, just the ability to stay on his feet. You love that. Athleticism from an offensive lineman, the hips, the flexion there to open his hips and just kind of continue to work in pass protection when someone gets an edge in those spots. I thought he played with real back bend, and that could create some leverage within his game as well. Balance on contact, and just, again, ability to recover in some certain tough spots. Now, second level, didn't like him as much here necessarily. Came back to some of the speed when he was working up to the second level, but then you get to the hand use as well, and the great length definitely helps, though he probably needs to kind of pull back on some of the reaching when he's reaching guys that he can't necessarily reach and he gets caught lunging a little bit. He showed the ability to drop his pad level in the first contact. He showed quick first inside hands, accurate first zone punch, and a bend to connect with the chest. The guy that I definitely liked when I was watching, and the control, some of the early pass pro, some of the first step definitely popped when I was watching Brian. Definitely someone I'm keeping my eye on from this offensive line group specifically. Move over to a safety out of Ball State, and this is going to be Lauren Strickland, and this is a transfer from Indianapolis, and honestly, he was kind of rotational. Like, you go back to 2022, he had 0 starts in 12 games. In this past season, he had 5 starts in 12 games with Ball State, so that's very interesting when you just talk about experience in general here. With that being said, though, you definitely felt the aggressiveness, and you felt that impact pretty immediately when you watch him, and you also saw some flexibility within where he would just align defensively. Aggressive downhill to play the run. I also thought he played with a pretty fluid weave when it came to, like, okay, I'm pressing downhill, play action, I got to open up and turn and run. I thought that was pretty fluid. So you'd see him line in, like, some slot positions. You'd also see him line at the safety position as well. He attacked wide receiver blocks. There were occasions where he's just, like, uplifting and just rolling over wide receivers. Even though he's not the biggest guy necessarily, the testing scores are pretty strong. 18 bench press reps, 38-inch verticals, sub 7-second 3-cone drill, 4.65 40. I can rock with all that, and then the flexibility was very big there as well. I saw a lot of that against Kentucky. Even at times, he would handle a single high roll, which is really one of my biggest questions is, where is the range going to be for this player? Does he have the range to sit in some of those single high rolls? I need to watch more to get a better sense of that, but I definitely love the way that he played the game, the demeanor that he played with. That stood out early, because to me, the acceleration recovery felt like it was below average, and his transitions felt a little bit tight when he was playing at that single high alignment. However, though, again, you saw some good smarts in coverage, and that came off-man coverage, eye balance, right? Just kind of reading through not only where his receiver is, so he breaks, pass him off, but then also still reading the quarterback through that. He played with really strong eye balance. We're being able to put the receiver in his vision, but really key in on the quarterback. And then also you see in zone coverage as well, the ability to get out into the flats, and he had some success there, which could show up from safety or even from that slot role. And then back to the football intelligence aspect, like, this guy's demeanor was right. Like, he was competitive. You could see the competitiveness when things went well, and you could see it when things didn't go so well. I thought, the Georgia touchdown that he gave up, where they kind of stacked it up and he allowed himself to get stacked in that position. But overall, run pass option awareness, I'm at down from slot man. Like, there was a lot to like there.
Like a lot of these other players, instincts, right? Whether that's matchup awareness like this, right? Passing off responsibilities, just kind of feeling a workout to the flat, just having a nose for the football within the box, kind of getting a sense to step down, or, hey, there's double slants. Maybe this is something I should dive on. Just some instincts that popped. You got flashes of the instinctual feel.
And then it is just overall as a tackler, he was a strong wrap-up tackler that would just initiate contact, breaks down the sideline in terms of just paces himself pretty well, and he's a striker that just tries to shut down all sort of leakage. I felt like he had to have some sort of wrestler background. I don't know that he did or not. He may not have, but he just looked like he had a wrestling background by the way that he tackled guys, and he just had finishing force on contact. Staying in the box could be a little bit of an issue for him, but I did like how he attacked offensive linemen as a blitzer, getting low on the play to try to set and control his edge. Overall here, there's just a lot more that needs to be seen with the player, with the demeanor, the toughness, the physicality, all those things were there, and then also some of the flexibility, which I think kind of pulls back to some of the football intelligence that he just felt like he was playing with in coverage. On the safety side, let's talk about a guy that I felt was built like a running back. I mean, you talk about Malik Mustafa out of Wake Forest, but you should probably talk about his teammate that's a transfer from Navy, and that is going to be a guy that I know I'm going to butcher this name, so just hang with me on this one. Kellen Garnes? Chellen Garnes, I gotta believe it's like Keelan Garnes. Oh, maybe it's Keelan Garnes. Keelan Garnes, that's pretty fire. Keelan Garnes, safety out of Wake Forest, 5'9.5", 199. So I think that gives you a sense of what this guy looks like. 18 bench press reps, shorter arms at 30 inches, 37.5-inch vertical. I've set 4.57 40. Looks like a special teams piece immediately if he were to make the team. Like that's where he's probably going to thrive, is what he could do on special teams. Because again, you go back to being willing against the run. I mean, this is just staple. Draft, non-draft, whatever it is. Lions get defensive backs that are going to tackle. It's as simple as that, and you don't have that issue with this player either. Incredibly quick to just pull the trigger and get downhill. Quick, like just quick decision making. Is very decisive and aggressive with that first step downhill. He also did a nice job of reading the running back through the box. He had good vision on the back, though I thought his downhill angles could be pretty poor, especially like reading through the offensive line scheme. Like here's some pullers, and then just not seemingly like reacting to that at all to get on top of the play. And his lateral speed is not necessarily the best either, which could be an issue, maybe even more so in coverage. When you talk about being a little bit late to find the ball away from assignment, that popped up a little bit in some of the play speed aspect, and then even just some of the transition ability didn't feel as crisp. Felt a little bit like it would break loose a little bit, little footy, not as tight in those spots. It showed ability to play a single high roll, turn and run. I thought that looked adequate. Also some football intelligence based on situation, red zone spots. He was very controlled, right? When to pull the trigger, when not to, when to be very patient, getting into coverage assignments. I did like that closing airspace. And then again, he is strong. He showed that he was honestly built to play in the box. I like that he broke down on tackles in space, and then the way that he would sort through the box with eyes open. And really the big thing here was the activeness as a communicator. Like this guy felt like a quarterback of your safety room. That's kind of the vibe that I got when watching him. Very active communicator. It was very consistent. You would see it every play, pre-snap and during the play. This man's calling out crossers like, hey, it's here while I'm running to my position. Like he was an excellent communicator, which I think was huge. So physicality, communication, and again, just willingness to step down and play the run with some clear-eyed vision once he got into those spots. All right, now to wrap it all up, and again, we're not talking about the minicamp invites. I didn't get to those players yet, but we also have a kicker and a long snapper. I'm not doing a breakdown of this, but I'll read some numbers. So James Turner from Michigan, who's a transfer from Louisville, last season, though, was with Michigan, where he went 18 of 21 with a 50-yard long field goal, though he was 3 of 4 from 50+, so I got to believe he was 3 of 4 from 50 yards. That would just be my assumption. Maybe he missed one that was longer than that, but he probably made 3 field goals that were exactly 50 yards long, only missing 1 extra point. The year before that at Louisville, he was 20 of 22, while only missing 1 extra point, not having a 50-yard field goal, 48-yard long. So just by the numbers, it seems like there's worry, or maybe not worries, but you'd wonder how big his leg actually is. But over the last couple seasons, there's been consistency. The year before that, not as much. But statistically, that's pretty good consistency in college, which you don't typically see. So that does stand out when you look at James Turner. And then you also have a long snapper, which is Hogan Hatton of Idaho, and he is a long snapper that specifically became the full-time long snapper in 2022 with Idaho.
Now, what's special about this player, and I have a clip, so he's going to speak towards it. I found this clip online, but this is a 3-star high school linebacker that has linebacker tape at the college football level that used long snapping, which is something that he did in high school, as kind of his entry point to be able to get on the field as a true freshman when they needed someone to do so after their current long snapper was struggling. So this guy is very unique in the sense that even if he was just a long snapper, which is, again, where he's full-time now, he is the kind of athlete that's also probably going to make plays on the football special teams wise. You can see it by the numbers alone, and that does not hurt to have a guy that can snap it and get out there and make a tackle.
Is my athleticism. I'm going to be the only long snapper in this year's draft class that has any starting Division I tape at linebacker, which I think is a huge benefit in terms of being able to run, tackle. I'm going to be the only one with 100+ tackles, and I'm going to be the only one with real game film. So that's a huge bonus to me, as well as I had a really good pro day. I posted a 36-inch vertical, 18 reps on the bench press, a 4.75 40, and a 4.27 shuttle. So I think my athleticism is what sets me apart in this year's draft class, and I'm hoping that the team see it as well.
That was a unit where in 2022 he had 15 total tackles, including also having a block punt against Duke and also a safety against Montana. Then this past season he had 3 tackles on special teams, while again being the full-time long snapper for Idaho. So, you know, we have our long snapper, but last year we saw that we went through 2 guys. So not a bad thing to get a guy in the building, see what he's like, and then maybe just even keep that name in your mind, because maybe that ends up being a guy that you need to call at some point during the season. So with all that being said, those are, and I'm hoping I don't miss anybody here, those are your undrafted free agent signings that we have been told about so far. Hopefully I hit on everybody. I think I did here. I'm going to leave it there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'm out.